Welcome to week 2, day 7 of the fall 2025 Web Development Technologies course. I'm Jim Kaufman with Rankin Technical College. So, as far as what we're going to go ahead and go over today, I want to talk a little bit about assignment grading and kind of review, this part of the syllabus about late work and attendance. Just kind of want to review that real quick. I'm going to go do another quick review, just kind of some of the concepts from week 1. And from there, I want to go ahead and talk about the book appendices, in the back of the book. They're going to be very helpful going forward. And all other resources as well, which I kind of already showed you, but kind of wanted to go back through that a little bit. And it'll be very helpful, especially we start getting into some of the CSS stuff in Chapter 4. I'm going to do a preview of Hot 1, hands-on test. And that hands-on test, I'll mention this again later, but that's one of these assignments that I really can't help you with too much. I mean, if there's a question about directions, that's fine. And but as far as help me work through this, I can't do that on the hands-on test. But it's not too bad. It's pretty much stuff. Usually it's always going to be stuff you've kind of already done. It's going to be kind of redundant from some work that you've already done. So it's just kind of testing those certain areas. And then after that, just want to mention I'll be adding a Chapter 4 homework assignment. It'll probably be a little bit of substantial, but we're not going to have 3 chapter. First week we went over 3 chapters, so here we're pretty much going to be doing just Chapter 4, but it's it's a lot much more extensive. And then I'll go ahead and start on a Chapter 4 lecture and do a little bit of a demonstration, kind of part 1 of a demonstration, and then tomorrow we're going to do a lot more on that. So, okay, let's go to get started on that. So as far as late work and retakes, so written tests can only be taken once. So you pretty much, once you take a test, and just to kind of review this, I might have talked about this. I'm not 100% sure, but when you complete a test, if you don't actually submit it, if you actually don't completely submit it, then it will automatically just get submitted when the deadline passes. It'll automatically submit wherever you are with it. So if you actually only did part of it, that would get submitted. If you did the whole thing, it'll be fine as well. But you can manually submit the test after you're finished. If you don't, it's going to submit it automatically when that deadline comes. But they can only be taken once. All other coursework can be submitted late if you didn't start it at all, or a retake if you didn't like your score, you didn't like what you did, you want to kind of redo that. You can do that, and there's just a 10% penalty off the top of that. So basically, if it was something you didn't even start and you went ahead and did it and you got 100% on it, you did everything right, well, you'd end up getting a 90% instead, right? Or if you got a 90, you'd be getting an 80, right? So you basically just take 10% of the points off the top, right? Before a retake on a hands-on test. So I wanted to bring this up since we do have a hands-on test this week. So for some reason next week, for some reason you didn't take it, or you got a poor score and you wanted to kind of retake it. The only way you can retake it is you must have all of the labs that are pertinent to that. Okay, so we've got those lab assignments that for Chapter 1s and 2 and 3, you pretty much have to have them all completed. Not that you have to have 100% score on it, like an A, right? 100% score on it, but you have to have them all completed, 100% completed, right? Before you can retake it. Okay. Now, as far as taking it the first time, the hands-on test the first time, you don't necessarily have to get them all completed, all of your other assignments completed to take the hands-on test. It obviously is going to help you, right? And it's be in your best interest. But if you end up wanting to do a retake or submit it, right? If you want to take a retake or you want to submit it late, okay, you're going to have to make sure that you do all of those other assignments first, okay? And I think I will probably send out a separate email on that just to make sure everybody understands that. Um, and then anytime you do any late submissions, you need to communicate that with me, either by email or Discord, saying, hey, hey, Mr. Kaufman, I went ahead and submitted chapter 3 assignment, lab assignment, or whatever, okay? So please make sure you do that. Because sometimes I'm, with multiple students, I don't always catch them. I don't always realize, oh, you didn't even turn that in, right? So please do that. Um, and just kind of to reiterate, make a habit out of committing your work often to GitHub. And for multiple reasons, and like I've stated before, but, especially for attendance, you don't want to get to a point where something happens and it's a Sunday, you haven't submitted anything. You might have been working on things all week long and you just didn't submit it to GitHub. Well, a couple different reasons that's not a good idea is if for some reason something goes wrong with you trying to commit it, then all of a sudden you're in a predicament there. And the other is if for some emergency happens, something happens on that Sunday, and you don't get your work in, then it's going to be late, right? So try to make sure you commit your work to GitHub. At least for attendance reasons, you want to make sure you at least have something submitted, right? Like I said before, there's a very low bar on attendance. As long as you do a written test or any kind of assignment, you turn that in, you're going to be marked as present that week. And actually, this week, everyone has been marked. Everybody who started the course was marked as present this week, so that's a good way to get started on that. Also, want to mention when you go out to your, and I'll bring this up again. I know this stuff's still new, and you're sometimes you forget about things. It's easy to do. Let's see what's going on here. I'm just going to go ahead and remove this for now. Yeah, I guess I did remove that. Maybe I'll show you that later. When I take a break, I'll come back and show you that. I need to get this set up again. But just kind of want to mention, how to get to your GitHub repository. You got your local one, you got the one on the internet, right? You have your one on GitHub, and you want to make sure, it's a good idea, but just to kind of check, make sure that everything looks. Oh, yep, I did it. Because sometimes you forget to, you might forget to commit your work altogether, or even if you commit it, you always have to do that push too, right? Besides just the commit, you got to do that push to get it out there. And it's always kind of good practice to go and make sure that everything's out there, everything looks good. Let's see, commit your code anytime you finish. Just saying anytime you maybe get a lab assignment done, especially the small ones. And even if you don't get something complete, there's nothing wrong with just pushing it out there, okay? And I suggest you do that, and especially on larger type exercises and assignments. Just go ahead and push it out there. Don't have to be complete or right. And grades will be assessed based on the most recent submission. So let's say, your work is due on Sunday by midnight, 11:30, midnight, whatever. And by that Sunday evening, if you submitted something on Friday, on Saturday, and then for the same assignment, and then on Sunday, basically it's that one that gets submitted on Sunday that will be graded. And as far as the hands-on test, just to reiterate on that, remember the hands-on test are, and I spoke about that on day one and about the grade weighting, and I also kind of sent you on email where I had a link to the grade weighting section in the YouTube video. Just to remember, hands-on tests are worth 40% of your grade, so they're a significant part. So you want to make sure you do well on those. Real quick here on attendance, just to review this. Basically, attendance is based on you submitting an assignment. and you only get a maximum of 2 absences. So if you don't turn in something one week, say let's say week 2 you don't turn anything in and you're marked as absent. Say week 10 you don't turn anything in and you're marked absent. Then if you have another week, you'll automatically, if that happens a third time, you'll be automatically removed. The registrar's office will automatically drop you from the course. If that happens, you can appeal that, but um, best not to get into that situation. So, okay. What else was on my list here? Okay, I just want to review. Assignment grading, a little bit on that. So, generally, I try to get that done as quickly as possible, especially Monday being a holiday, kind of slowed that down. So, hopefully, by Wednesday, the end of the day, I'll have that done. And I'm not 100% sure on that either, because basically, all these, currently we have 10 students in the class. So, 10 students, there's multiple little assignments. So actually it comes up to like over 230 assignments. So 230 assignments that I'll have to go through. So it'll take me a little bit of time to go through all that. I will try to, if you get 100% on something, I'm not going to mark anything. But I'll try to put little messages where especially where you might have missed a lot of things. I'll try to make sure I document that so you can see what you missed. And like I said, I'll try to get that done as quickly as possible. Okay, concepts. Let's do a quick review here. So, key concepts from Chapter 1, just the internet and basic web fundamentals. Pointing out a few things here. Remember that Hypertext Transfer Protocol is HTTP, right? That's basically the protocol, and a protocol is a set of rules, a set of guidelines for how one computer basically can communicate with another computer, right? And in this case, is how you can on your client, your computer is a client computer, and your client computer communicates with a server based on the HTTP transfer protocol, right? It's part of the URL. File transfer protocol isn't really the web. Whenever you hear HTTP, think web, right? The FTP protocol really isn't the web. It's part of the internet, but it's a different protocol, has different rules, and that's just used basically for sending files from a client computer to a server, right? TCP IP is very important. It gets much more into networking type stuff. I'm not going to go into that too much. Website planning. Planning a website involves defining its purpose and target audience. So remember, it's all about what's the purpose of this, who's my target audience. It's very important because you may design it differently depending on who your target audience is. Are they my target audience going to be using primarily phones, or is my target audience sitting in an office somewhere on a desktop? So that makes a difference on how you're going to plan your website, especially if it's something very very complex and intricate that you want to really design it for kind of a desktop scenario as opposed to say a phone. A wireframe is basically a visual guide that depicts the layout of a web page, and a sitemap shows how the pages on a website relate to each other. Website principles. Key design elements include graphics, navigation tools, typography, and color schemes. We're going to look into a lot more color schemes going forward. It is important to design for accessibility, catering to diverse audience, including those with physical impairments. Responsive design ensures a website adapts to different screen sizes, such as desktops, tablets, and mobile devices. Hypertext markup language. So as we discussed before, HTML is a markup language. Another one that's very popular is also XML, but XML is used more for not necessarily reading by humans, but for reading by computer programs. Maybe computer programs that would read an XML file. It's very descriptive. It has a lot more data-related type content. Okay, that that makes much more sense for a computer program to be reading. Um, but HTML is basically used to create documents for the web. You have HTML tags, also known as elements or special instructions that define the structure and the layout of content on a web page. The World Wide Web Consortium, which is also called W3C, develops and maintains web standards and language specifications. Also, kind of want to note, remember we went and looked at Mozilla. Mozilla's kind of, they're not the, if you're really one of the specific specifications, you go to W3C, but most people aren't going to really read them unless there's some reason, especially from a developer standpoint. But if you go to kind of Mozilla, Mozilla is kind of the de facto. It's not the actual, factual documentation, but the closest you're going to get to the actual documentation for HTML and other ones as well, other languages like CSS and JavaScript. They also have substantial amount of documentation there. As far as chapter 2, we went ahead and built a web page template with HTML. Learned about the different parts of the web page, such as a header, navigation area, primary content area, and a footer. Talked about semantic elements such as header. Semantic elements are elements that provide some meaning about what's between those tags. Like you have a beginning header tag and an end header tag. Well, what's between there? Well, header is telling you, well, this is a header. This is something up there at the top, right? Navigation's navigation. Usually you're going to be able to click links, right? So it's telling you something about that. You have your main section, footer section, etc. Right? Went ahead and created a template, a pre-designed structure then that ensures a consistent layout. Now, obviously, we didn't do all of these things, but as time goes on, you will be building upon that, and covering these other areas as well. Other elements, we looked at character entities, such as like copyright symbols that are used to display special characters. And do want to recall that there's kind of different kinds of character entities that are the named entities, and then there's the numeric ones where you do named, it's going to be like at copy. Remember that was for the copyright. Well, and then you also have the numbered ones as well. So remember that because that's important. And I think there's a mention in the hands-on test about that. So you want to make sure you use the right one. Also, we talked about heading elements. We have H1, H2, all the way through H6. Remember that you really just want one H1 heading element on your page. Then after that, you want to kind of go down from there, H2, H3, etc. Not that you can't have multiple, say H2s. Usually H1, you're just really going to do one. That's usually that very top level. Then an H2, you can have multiple H2s. But you don't want to just go from an H1 to an H4. You really should be following from H1, H2, then H3, right? And like I said, though, you could have multiple H2s or multiple H3s, but you don't really just want to skip them, okay? You want to kind of follow that in that order. And we've just looked at how documents can be validated for checking errors using that website. And so you'll be doing that here on the hands-on test and for other things as well moving forward. As far as chapter 3, looked into enhancing a website with images and links. So different kinds of file formats. There's the GIF, the PNG, the JPEG, the SVGs, right? And an image is composed of pixels, and a higher resolution image can slow down a web page load time. So sometimes, you might want to, when you're making decisions on that, you may want, like, let's just say you've got a website that has a bunch of different images. There's multiple ways to handle that. There's multiple techniques, but sometimes you want to go ahead. You don't maybe necessarily want the best quality image. Maybe you're okay with it being a little less because it's going to take up much room. It's going to download faster. Now, it all depends on, your connection speed. If you've got a very fast connection speed from, your standpoint, that's one thing. But, you got to consider your client. Who's your client? Who's your target audience? Maybe, a lot of target audiences, not everybody has really fast internet speeds, and it's going to take a while for that to download, right? So it's always something you need to keep in mind. We also looked at image tags. IMG tag is an empty tag used to add an image. Remember the difference between tags that have closing tags and an empty tag. Well, an image tag's one of those empty tags, right? Usually you've got different attributes in there, and the source attribute's a very important one, right? The source attribute's a very important one. It's required to identify, where this image is, where's the path to this image. So usually if it's something that you're in control of, it's within your directory structure, right? When you do that, you're using that relative path. Well, if maybe that path would be something on the internet, I don't suggest you do that. Usually it's always best to have your images local, but not that you can't point to something somewhere else. Always remember to use the alt attribute, and the alt attribute's very important for accessibility reasons, for those screen readers and that. They'll actually read, because not everybody, if someone is visually impaired, they may not be able to see that image, and if you have that alt, those screen readers will read out loud what's in that alt tag, right? And also some of the search engine optimization. These little robots that are always indexing pages, like Google and Google, for Google's search engine and other search engines as well. They have these little programs that run on the internet, right? And they're going out indexing all these different pages. And that's also very important for that. Not just the alt attribute, the title of your page, even the headings and everything else. They use all of that, right? So by following these best practices, using semantic tags, using the titles, the alt tags, that all benefits and helps with your search engine optimization. And the whole reason you want to do well with that is because then your page is going to be, especially if it's a public page that you want it to be ranked really high, right? So by doing those things, it really will help for your pages to be ranked higher. And some other attributes. Sorry, kind of went in a little different direction there. But so as far as the image, other attributes for that is height and width. Kind of define the image's dimensions. Images can be some people are a little better doing that than others, and I don't consider myself all that great at some of that stuff. Especially you start putting images, saying 200 by 200 pixels. Depends on the size of that image, right? And if that image was kind of a rectangular, it's going to distort that a little bit. And if for the most part, not a big deal in this course, if it's not perfect, okay, not the best you can do, just do the best you can on that, but keep that in mind. Hyperlinks are the primary ways to navigate among web pages. You use what's called the anchor element, the A tag, right? It's used to create a hyperlink. The href tag is the hypertext reference, and it's basically so the A tag's it's a starting anchor tag, identifies the link's destination, right? So hypertext, your href tag could be, we talked about the relative path of an href, and so your relative path of that href could be relative, and it's going to be within whenever you hear relative, think it's in with your own directory structure. It's going to be something where you're controlling where that page is. But you may just want to link to other websites. If you're linking to other websites, you're going to need to use the absolute path, which is the http:// right? The whole path, right? So that would be called the absolute path. Types of list. So the types of links include relative links, we said that, and absolute links. Bookmark, you can also do, remember we did that bookmark stuff. I had an example of that where you had a bookmark. Start out with using the little hash sign, and it would go to that specific ID on that page. So if you have an ID on that page, it will go to that specific part of your page. So you can, especially when you've got a page with a lot of things on there, you can actually have a link at the top that goes to different parts, or it could be a side navigation too, right? Maybe you want to have everything in one page. It makes sense in certain circumstances. You can click those different bookmarks and you go to different parts in that page. Right? We also looked at the HTML supports different types of lists, such as unordered list, so with the UL tag, and descriptive list also with DL. I guess some of the stuff got cut off here, but so unordered list usually got bullets, and then the ordered list, they're in a certain order. By default it's going to be 1, 2, 3, and you can also, I know on the assignment the homework assignment, you had to change that to use letters instead, right? So there's ways to do that where you don't. So it's going to be A, B, and C, and it also will work for, besides numbers, letters. You can also use it for Roman numbers as well, and Arabic as well. So there's different options there on that. So just kind of want to do a quick overview of that, just to kind of review that real quick. And let's see here. All right, want to look at the book appendices real quick. Let's see where we're at. So in the back of the book, so in this, see what that is. Yep. So in the back of the book, starting like, and this may be a little different. I know that, and I kind of mentioned this. I started putting kind of the highlighted text in the assignments that some of the pages may be off a little bit. It's just how they did different versions of the book. So, but starting towards the end of the book, you've got an Appendix B working with the HTML, CSS, page 544. And there's some good things in here, just some basics, defining a document. If you forget some of this stuff, right, it's going through this. There's a lot here, and it talks about semantic elements. We were talking about the semantic. Well, here's all the list of the semantic elements and their intended use. Footer, navigation, there's all the ones and why they're used, what they're used for. Skip over that part. And not every one of these elements here list the HTML elements that are deprecated in XHTML. No, we ain't going to worry about that. But there is, let's get past this XHTML stuff, working with cascading style sheets. So this is one that's going to be kind of really helpful for you going forward here. You have what's called CSS properties, CSS selectors. And we'll look at this on some more, but I just want to make you aware of what's out here, right? And then here's where there's a lot of things will be very helpful. Element ID, an ID, to access an ID, you're going to use the pound sign. For a class, it's going to be a dot. We're going to go through all of this. So these are different kinds of selectors. We'll go through all of these. But, this is just another resource for you. Okay, just another resource. So kind of also want to point out this again, basically W3 schools. You've got all these different, you're working on your assignments, don't know what to do. You got your book. You can use you can use what's in the chapter of the book. You can use your appendices. You can search on the internet, or just a Google search or whatever. And you can also come out to W3 schools. So it has different things like we talked about. I think I showed you like the list stuff here when we were talking about how to do a different kind of ordered list. So all of that's out here. Here's the different types, that's what I kind of showed you before. So you have a lot of resources here on W3 schools. Just wanted to mention, like I said before, that the Mozilla is kind of the de facto standard. I think recent, back a while back ago, they didn't have a lot of things updated on on W3 schools, but I think they have been doing a lot better job of keeping things updated. But just like just want to let you know, this isn't really like like a this isn't the documentation, right? This is what they that they created, but like the de facto unofficial documentation is really the one on Mozilla. But we're going to be doing CSS, and this is going to be very helpful for that. You just go through some of this. If you don't understand things, you can go through this tutorial. Has the syntax, all the different selectors, right? Explains things if you don't understand it. Be very beneficial. Okay, be very beneficial. And maybe I'll send some later when I do the update later this week. I'll send some specific links that go directly to some places to make things a little easier. But here's the lots of good stuff here. Okay, and always wanted to kind of mention here we also have this here at the Mozilla as well. So just not as easy to navigate in that, right? A little more challenging. But it does have some basic introduction of things, different tutorials that you can go through. Okay, and you just follow through some of this stuff. Okay, you always got to think outside of just the book. You got to always use other different resources, right? Especially you get a job, you're gonna be in situations where you're not gonna know how to do things. You need to learn different places. You have to have your list of places that you can go to help you for different things, right? Because obviously it's okay to ask some questions, especially when you're new somewhere at an employer. But doesn't take long. You need to really be figuring things out yourself, right? So. Okay, so next let's go ahead and go through this hands-on test. And like I said, this is something, I'm not going to go into anything, too in depth here. Just kind of want to go over the basics here and, make sure that you put this in the correct directory, right? We have the hands under your HTML, CSS. You got the hands-on test. And this is the hot one. This is the first one. Okay. Total points possible is 100. And like I said, make sure you don't sit there and compare this to a lab because it's worth a lot more. This is just one of, you'll probably have 10 hands-on tests. I'm just guessing here, okay? Probably around 10 hands-on tests between the HTML stuff and the JavaScript one, somewhere around there, 10 to 12, okay? So that'll be like 1,000 points. So this will be, but you want to try to get those high percentages on all these hands-on tests as much as possible. So this one though here, as you see, once I grade your other assignments, we'll be using what's kind of that rubric, and you'll be able to go into your coursework assignment on Inside Rankin, and you'll see that I showed you that rubric. It was kind of a box of where I'll be marking that and putting some comments on as well. But this here, I'll just be following this, and I'll make some comments on this, and I'll either I'll probably just email it to you. And so that this is what you'll have for your hands-on test. Okay, I'll grade it right here and put all the comments here. Okay. So back to directory structure. Pretty much. Really not a lot to really go through. This is just all stuff that we've kind of already covered a little bit. And there might be some things that don't tell you exactly what to do. This is probably more descriptive than really I should have been on this. Probably just said, add a header element, and then instead of showing you the exact tag and everything, right? Just add a header, add navigation, right? I probably could have done that, probably would have been better. This is giving you a little bit more. One thing I do want to point out here, HTML named entity. So an HTML named entity is different than the numbered entity. Okay, so if you don't remember, go look up what that means so you use the right one. So really just the basics here. There might be some areas where, here it does mention the source attribute. Some place where it mentions links and stuff. Let's see here. Let me go back up here. Oh, mm, mm. You know, I may not have mentioned every single thing, right? Um, so here you're talking about these links should point to the respective files. Well, you're going to have to, how do you do a link, right? Use that A tag for a link. So not necessarily every single thing's in here. Let's see. Do want to point out that we haven't covered buttons, but kind of wanted to, since this was kind of a store type thing, I wanted to have a place your order where you kind of click something. So this is how you do a button. We haven't covered that. We'll cover that later. But you can just cut and paste this right here, okay? And you'll use that as a button. I didn't want to just tell you guys to put a button on the page when we didn't cover any of that, right? So that's, you can just cut and paste and use this. And what else did I want to go through on here? So make sure, validate 10 points of this 10%. Basically 10 points is 10%. 10% of this hands-on test is your HTML validation. So you got 4 different files that you need to run through this validator. And I don't know how different students create screenshots, but let me, if you go down to your search bar, I can't show it up here because of the, I'm sharing the screen and it kind of works a little different. But there is a snipping tool within within Windows 10, Windows 11. You got a snipping tool, and you can just click on that. I just went down to the search bar at the bottom, put in snipping tool, right? And then here you just can do a new, right? So you're going to want to go to the validator and validate it. You want to upload your files. When you get those results, you want to have it where the page where it has errors or warnings, and then you want to go ahead and do new. And then I wasn't going to actually go to the site, and then that's how you can go ahead and get things. And by default, I think this is usually going to save this. By default, I'll show you where this kind of saves this. Usually this is going to save this in, let me see, screenshots. You probably have pictures and you'll have screenshots. And so 9/2, that's today. This is the one I just did. So this is that screenshot right here. And you can probably see it being previewed over here on the right-hand side. So then you can just take this and copy this right into your folder, okay? Copy this right into your folder for your hands-on test. And the same thing for other ones as well, right? Whenever you have to do a screenshot. That's just one way. You might do it some different way. That's fine as well, as long as you get a screenshot created. And make sure you're showing where there's, make sure it's the page where it shows about the errors or warnings and showing there are none, right? So that's about all I'm going to really cover here on this hands-on test. Like I said, if you have any questions about directions, that's fine. As far as me helping you with any of that, you're going to have to kind of do that on your own. Okay? All right. Time to look at the PowerPoint for Chapter 4. Okay. So Chapter 4 is about designing web pages with CSS. Basically, CSS is a technology that's used, to make pages a little more aesthetically pleasing. I've got a little example here, very small example. We'll do something much more in depth tomorrow. But even this, compared to what we've already did, we only just seen some text and heading sizes. That's about all we've seen so far on our assignments. Now we're starting to add some colors, and you can do some different things. Float images. CSS can be used for moving things from one side to the other, and we'll be taking a look at that. So this is kind of the first part of a demonstration for CSS. And we'll take a look at the code and the results on this page here in a little bit. So the objectives here is you will have master material in this chapter when you can explain the importance of separating design from content. Describe what cascading style sheets is. Define inline, embedded, and external styles and their order of precedence. One goes, so if you've got it in all three, we'll look at this in a minute. You got it, you could have it inline, basically inside your HTML thing. You could have it embedded, and that'll be at the top of your HTML file, or you can have it in a separate file, a CSS file, and so that's external. So one's going to take precedence over the other, okay, and we're going to go through that. Describe a CSS rule and its syntax. Explain the difference between a selector, a property, and value. Create styles that use text and color properties. Explain the differences between inline and block content. Describe the use of CSS box model to apply margins, padding, and borders. We'll also look at within, we'll look at this within Chrome, because Chrome has what's called, I think I touched on this just a little bit last week, but Chrome has what's called Chrome Developer Tools. And it'd be a good idea just to continually learn more about those Google developer tools. Chrome's not the only one. Other browsers also have developer tools as well, but they're a very a good resource and a tool to help you. So we're going to look at that a little bit more here today, and obviously into the future as well. We'll look how to create an external style sheet and link it to an HTML page. How to create responsive images, how to use float and clear properties, create a style ID and class attributes, use a span element, and add comments to external style sheet and validate a CSS file. Okay, just like we did the HTML, there's another link that I'll give you that, and I think I've already have it in some of the assignments already, for validating the CSS as well. All right. So creating a well-designed website that captures your audience attention is vital in attracting and obtaining new customers. A web developer can use formatting such as font styles, font colors, white space, and background colors, or images to increase the visual appeal of a web page. So cascading style sheets, a language used to describe the formatting, right? It's formatting of a document, as opposed to HTML is structure and layout. Always remember HTML, this is a good one for interview questions as well. You know, always remember that HTML is structure and layout. CSS is formatting. So it describes the formatting of a document written in a markup language such as HTML5. CSS determines the formatting for a web page. So it's just talking about this project of the web page. Not that we're necessarily going to do this, follow that completely here, but basically, how to create a CSS file. I'll show you that. How we link HTML pages to a CSS file. How we create CSS file rules, add comments, validate the CSS file. Style rule defines the appearance of an element on a web page. So a style sheet is a set of CSS style rules. It provides a means to separate style from content because it gives the flexibility to redesign or rebrand a website. So as far as this idea of separating style from content, And you know, there's going to be some assignments that's going to ask you to put like inline stuff in there. Um, and you will notice if you have all the extensions in Visual Studio Code, if you have those extensions, it's going to actually flag that as an error, as at least a warning, right? It's not really an error. It's going to flag it as a warning. It might be red, but it's going to flag that as a warning for inline styles because the way the suggested way, best practices is not to include your CSS in your code. It's okay to have it at the top of your code, your top of your HTML file, which we're going to look at that as well, but it's best not to have that within your HTML elements where you got that CSS. It makes it more, causes maintainability issues. CSS is, especially, let's just say you've got this big website. I mean, it's a huge, one of these, companies that, let's just say ESPN or, a news website where they've got multiple pages. It's a very broad-based website. Well, you know what they do? They don't. And there might be some times they might use some inline stuff, little places here and there, but it's like I said, it's not best practices. But for the most part, they're going to have styles that once you create a new page, you bring that in, and it's already going to format a lot of stuff for you. If you follow, they're going to have a styling guide and everything. Companies going to they follow a certain procedure and certain tags so that everything looks the same, right? You don't want to go from one page, it looks one way, and then go to another page, it looks completely different, right? So that's when you have these styles in just a separate file, you just bring that into your new HTML file, and you got a lot of things there, right? Now, obviously, there's some things on some pages. Some pages are different things, right? Some things maybe a list of a whole bunch of things where it's in a table or something, and you want it to look different than some other page. It's just a bunch of paragraphs of content, right? So you may have some additional styles, right? But still, your base styles usually you have kind of like a base styles file that this is what you start with, and then you add things from there, right? But it's kind of really important, and the whole idea of that's called separation of concerns, whereas your HTML file is your structure and your layout, all right, and then your CSS, right, is all your formatting. It's called a separation of concerns, and it helps out a lot with maintainability because you might have somebody who's an HTML, very good at HTML, but they're not so good at CSS. You might have some people that are a big, large corporation, and especially what we'll be doing later also is JavaScript, right? So we'll be using all three of those within our web page. We'll be using HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, right? And so it's a good idea to separate those things out, especially when you start getting. Usually the people who do HTML that you're great also do the CSS as well, but that's not always the case, but the JavaScript, you might have somebody who does that has the creative abilities. They're doing a lot of HTML, CSS, but they're not so, they're not doing like the coding, the JavaScript coding type stuff, right? That's more of a programming language. JavaScript's more of a programming language as opposed to the markup language of HTML and its formatting language in CSS, where you want to separate those things out, right? That's all this idea of separation of concerns, okay? And so that's why there's a good idea and best practices to keep things separate as much as possible, okay? That's not always the case to do that. It might be in certain circumstances where you can't do that, but it's always a good idea. So an inline style is used to add a style to a start tag for an element, such as a heading or a paragraph, using a style attribute. So here you can see an example. Let me make this a little bigger. So here you've got an H1 tag, and you're using the style attribute. Okay, a style attribute, and you're giving us a font color of navy, so this is going to be a bluish color, right? And so it will, when you do this, it's going to, what it will, the part that will actually, that will apply to is what's your content, right? In between your beginning tag and your end tag, right? This is the markup. This is the marked up text here, and this will be the part that's actually going to be that color. But that's an inline style, okay? And then we have what's called an embedded style. And an embedded style, you define this. You can define this up in define this up in your head section, okay? So remember, we have a head section where we have our title. Well, you can also add a style tag, okay? And inside that style tag, okay, and this is what's called a style rule. We've seen the body tag before, right? And so we use what we're saying is, for our body tag, let's make this background color green, okay? And so the whole, basically that body, and usually that body is that whole page, right? The background is going to be green, right? That's called embedded. This is embedded right into the HTML. And the inline is embedded, well, embedded at the top of, I should say, it's embedded at the top of the file for your HTML file within the head section, right? Inline styles are part of the tag, right? It's part of the tag. Now, an external style sheet's in a separate CSS file, okay, with this .css extension. So to apply an external style sheet, you have to link to it, okay? You link to it just kind of the same thing as you're linking to your image, right? It's a little different, right? It's a little different, but same concept. You know how you link to your image is in a different directory. Well, your CSS is going to be in a different place, right? Okay, so let's go ahead. I don't want to go through all these. I want to go ahead and look at some of the code here. Okay, so here's a little sample thing here. Welcome to my website here. You see it on the right-hand side. Kind of wanted to show you the different types of ways that you can use CSS as far as the inline and the external and the embedded. So here is an example of the body element. Okay, I have a style, a background color of green. Okay, and over here on the right hand side, you see it's green. Well, up here, okay, so this is an inline. So inline is going to take precedence. So inline would be the one that's going to be used if you have, even if it's in other places, even if you have it embedded. Here's an embedded one, which is blue on this one. But since this is embedded, it's only going to show if it's not inline, right? So basically, here's the style for inline, right? If I go ahead and remove this now, as you can see, I'm going to save that. It turned blue now, right? So inline takes precedence, then embedded, it's blue. If I go over here, I have this CSS directory I created, and I have this style sheet, okay? I have what's called an element selector. This is the same thing I have basically this is pretty much the same thing I have on the embedded one, right? You're pretty much going to be writing your code. You're doing your selectors like this. You'd be doing this either for embedded or in a CSS file, okay? That's when you use these selectors like this, okay? Here, this is kind of like an off-white color, right? But since we have it in our up here, it's going to use this as precedence, right? If I just kind of, I'm going to leave the rest there. I'm just going to get rid of that and leave, and boom. Now it's using, this is kind of a grayish color, it's a lighter gray color. And that's what this is here, okay? That's what this is here. This here, the color is basically the color of your font, okay? if I make this and we're going to look at this all a lot more here tomorrow and going forward here. So now I made it white, so that's going to be white, right? So let me see, what did I do here? That's something interesting that I'm kind of curious. I guess just because I didn't save it. That's weird. I think this is kind of like a little bug. Once I come over here and hit save, it's using this one. But if I come over here and hit save, it's using that. That's some kind of strange little bug there. So let's kind of, for now, let's just ignore that. I'm gonna have to look into that. I've never seen anything like that before. But basically, it should be using this one because this is the embedded style. Once I hit Control S and save it, it's good. Unless there's some other error on this page that's preventing that. But like one thing I did want to mention, so I have this font color of red here, okay? I have this font color of red here, and this is an inline style as well, okay? But what's going to happen when you do that, you see how this little squiggly thing? It's pretty much a warning, okay? Well, this is just saying font property unknown. But you may have something other in here, and you know, obviously if you spell something wrong, this name is very important. If you misspell this, it's not going to work, right? If you misspell, it's not going to work. I don't know. There's some weird thing going on here. I don't see how that could be working right there. Hit Control Save. I guess there's something going on with the, I bet if I open with Live Server again. Wow. Honestly, I've never seen it work like that. I don't know what's going on there. I'll have to investigate this. I don't see how it's doing that when I deleted it, removed it. Or was that already like that? Here, let me go. I might be confused myself here. Oh. No. Yeah, I was confused where I was at on the page. So obviously you spell it wrong. It's not going to work. If I save this now, am I going to have to open this in Live Server? I'm doing this on float and clear properties. So this should be red. This should be red. All right. Sorry to confuse everyone. I'll have to cut this out of the video. I don't know what's going on with that. Let's see if some other things work here. Let me change some floats. So right here on this page, this is floating to the left. I should be able to change the float to float on the right. Let me see if I do that. I know I did this earlier and it was working fine. Where's our float? Float to the right. Let's change this to right and save this. And that is working. I don't know what that other thing was going on there. So now it's floating this to the right. Okay. Let me go back and fix some things here. Let's see. Let's just get rid of these embedded style. I think there's some kind of conflict there. I think something's unusual is going on there. So this is white. So where do I have this white at? And this is, so that, yeah, that's working right now. And it's on the left because I removed that. All right. Sorry, I know I just confused you with all that. I'll just redo this part of the video and replace it. So let's just move on from here. So the next thing I want to mention is comments. So in a HTML, as you learned, we had assignments where you had to put in a comment, where you do the open bracket, you know, the bracket, open bracket, left bracket, and then you put an exclamation point and two dashes, and that's a comment in HTML. Okay, it's a comment in HTML. But for cascading style sheets, a comment is different. You cannot do this. You cannot do this in cascading style sheets. This is only for HTML. If you're doing a comment in style sheet, you have to do like here. Okay. You can do the / an asterisk, or you can just do this. Let me just get rid of this. Oh, no, you can't. Confusing that with the... okay. So, and this is the same as what you can do in cascading style sheets is the same as you'll learn in JavaScript. In JavaScript, this is also a comment. Okay, a lot of there's quite a few programming languages where / and asterisk is for a comment. Okay, CSS, JavaScript. We'll learn C# as well. That's how you do a comment. Whereas in HTML, you do a comment doing the open bracket, exclamation point, and two dashes. That's how you do, and that's only used in the HTML. Okay, let's go back up. So we have this style sheet, and I have mine under CSS, and then I have what's called styles.css. This is what I named it, right? So then here in the HTML, to call in an external style sheet, you have to use this link relation style sheet. It's a style sheet and need href of where it's at. And as you probably have already seen in Visual Studio Code, that it will kind of, once you start putting something in here, it will help you find it. So I just put a C, and then I click that, and then I can just click those, right? And so it will be the right place, right? And obviously this is an href tag. We're used to using an href tag with an A element, right, for our links. But this is kind of a special, don't get link confused with the A tag, right? Whenever you've got a hyperlink, you want to click it, you use the A tag, right? This link is special, and you're only using this, from our perspective, you're probably really going to be using this more for CSS stuff, okay? This isn't something you click, even though it says link. I know it can be kind of confusing. You think, well, this is a link tag, you click it. No, you can't click it, right? This is just telling you the location of the CSS file, and it's telling you it's a style sheet, okay? So obviously, if you have this wrong, your styles aren't going to work, right? So I just kind of get rid of this and hit save here and run this in. So pretty much all of the styles are gone now, right? Which is what you would expect. All right. So let's go back and look a little bit at some more slides. So basically the style sheet precedence. Style sheets are said to be to cascade because each type of style has a specified level of precedence. which we kind of already talked about, or priority in relationship to others. So CSS properties can be inherited from a parent element through a principle called inheritance. Okay. Um, if a style, if a selector has more than one CSS rule, specificity determines which CSS rule to apply. Okay, CSS basics. So each CSS rule consists of a selector and a declaration. We're already kind of looking at that for the body. So for the color of the page, and especially, people put that on the body a lot because the body pretty much takes up the whole page in your HTML, right? But that is, here you got background color of green. So, you put this on something else, you put this on your main tag. Well, your main tag is really not your whole page, right? So it's probably going to be just your main section, and whatever background color you gave it, it's just going to be that section, right? That area. I shouldn't call it section, since we do have section tags. Selector. Selector is a part of a statement that identifies what to style. So any HTML element, okay, such as body tag, header, nav, footer, main, all of those, right? May be a selector, okay? May also have a value of an ID or a class attribute, okay? And so we'll look at that as well. Let's just go ahead and take a look at that actually. So there's different ways to associate. So here, when you just use this name by itself, this is referring to just that HTML element called body, right? Here, you've got a pound sign in front of the special note, right? Whenever you see pound sign, think ID, okay? It's your ID element. It's going to be your ID called special note, okay? Any place, right? And always remember that for an ID, you really only want one per page, okay? You only want one per page. So just even look into the CSS, and here you can pretty much tell that really this is going to refer to one. Now, I'm not saying you can't have that ID on multiple things. It's a really bad idea to have an ID on multiple elements in on a page. You really should only have an every ID really should be unique, and not that you can't get away with doing it. And this would probably work from a CSS perspective, but there's other problems it can cause. So you really only want that to be unique. So when you're doing this here, you're pretty much saying, hey, find this unique ID of special note and apply the style. Okay. Up here it said find the HTML element called body and apply the style. Okay. Always remember you'll have to have open and end curly braces. Okay. Now this is what's called a class selector. The class selector is always going to start with a dot, a period, a dot, right? Okay, so if you see this period or dot, think class selector. So if you say, I want to find this one that's called highlight, the class selector, you come in here, okay, you're going to search for class, right? A class of highlight, okay? So here, this P tag has an ID of special note, and it's going to just use that. That was defined. It's going to use the styles that are defined here in our special note. For the other ones, where you're using class of highlight, see here you're using it multiple times. It's okay to use this multiple times, right? You really only should have this should only be used once. Every ID should be unique, and so you're kind of using that one time. Well, here if you're thinking, well, this is something I'm only going to use one time, then you use the ID. If this is something, say I might be using this multiple times on the page, then you want to use a class. Okay, you want to use a class. Let's see here. All right. And here it's doing dot box. So whenever you see a dot, you know this is a class. So you can be looking for class. This is just showing this a box model, CSS box model, which here we'll talk about that here in a minute. All right. So we looked at selectors. We looked at that body selector, right? So a selector is always going to be an HTML element, right? Body, header, nav, you know, and you don't put a dot, you don't put a dot or a hash before that. You just put the name of it, right? Just the tag itself, and then you put a begin curly brace. You put in the styles you want. You put an end curly brace. Okay. I do want to point out. So you'll notice that a lot of the way to do this is always putting in the colon here, right? So there's these different ones that are available. This is one, you know, there's multiple ones, but you know, this isn't something you make up your own name, right? These are specific CS styles that that can be used, right? Font family is one of them. Background color is one of them, right? You can't just skip this. You can't just skip this. You have to do it this way, right? You have to follow that. And always you put a colon, then you put the names of your styles. And in some cases, a font family can have multiple, and I'll show you later how that works, where it's going to use one. If it can't find that, because font families are used within computers, and it depends on your computer. Some computers will have some font families that others may not. You use you might have some really old computer. You're not using it might be a very early version of Windows or something, or you've got iOS is if we talk about an Apple computer like a Mac and things like that, that's using an iOS operating system, not a Windows operating system. You actually even have ones that are called a Linux operating system that you can have a desktop Linux, right? So some of them will have different font families. So basically this font family is going to look for one. If it's can't find that, then it's going to use what's called usually the last one in the list is going to be your default one. But you can have more than one, okay? It's going to try to use that one. Then you could possibly have another one here and say, well, if you can't find this one, use the second one. If you can't use the second one, use the default. The last one's always going to be your default one, okay? We'll talk about that again here in a little bit. But always remember, you've got the name, right? And then you've got your colon, and then the different types, and then always end it in a semicolon. All right. So declaration defines the exact formatting of the style. Consists of a property and a value, right? It's a property and a value. So in this case, we had a property and a value. So in this case, our property is our font family. Our value is here. Here our property is background color, and this is our value here, right? Et cetera, et cetera. For each property, the declaration includes a related value that identifies a particular property value to apply. The property identifies the style, quality, or characteristics to apply, such as color. Remember, colors is going to be text color. It's not going to be uppercase though. They're just doing this because of the slide here, but basically it's lowercase. But color is your text color. Background color, obviously the color of the page. Then you have here some other ones as well. You can have text indent that'll indent your text a little bit. You have a border. And here's you got a border width. You're going to do border. We'll look into borders a lot more here in the future. But borders can have a border width, a border height, or you can just say, if you just say border by itself, it'll make the border height and the width all the same. Okay, and we'll look at that. You also have a font style, and there's multiple other ones as well. Here we kind of already just looked at this scenario. We've got a body, which is our selector. Remember, if it doesn't have a period, a dot, a period, or a hash, also called a pound sign, If it doesn't have that, then you know it's a selector. If it's just the name, well, obviously, if it's a name of an HTML element, okay, this is a selector. So this styling is going to apply to everything in that body, right? Unless that you have some other styles for those other specific elements, then that is going to take precedence. So you have what's called CSS text properties, and you can use CSS styles to format web page text in a variety of ways. Fallback values are additional values provided for the font family property in case the browser does not support the primary font. And that's what I was kind of talking about a little bit. You have that fallback property is kind of your default one there, okay? CSS measures font sizes using many different measurements, okay? Just to confuse things for us, I guess. So you can define them as pixels, points, EMSs, and by keyword or percentage, okay? And we'll look at that here right now. So EM is relative to the default font size of the element. So we're going to see how we can actually create a font size kind of that's at the root, right? It's kind of a root font size. It's going to apply to the whole page. And then we start using EMs, these EMs, and these EMs are going to be relative to that font size. And how you would do that is, well, if you just had 1.0, it's basically going to be the same as your root one that you define. Your root font size, let's say you made it a root font size of 14 pixels. Okay, so then if you are, let's do another one. Let's say 10 pixels because we got 25. All right, so then if you had your root font size of 10 pixels and you did a relative font size of 1.25, it's going to be 10 plus 2.5, right? So it'd be like 12.5 would be by using 1.25. It's technically it's really going to take that root size and it's going to add 25% more, and so that 10 would become, for wherever you defined it like this, would be 12.5, right? And we'll look at that. Don't worry if that's confusing. And this is recommended by the standards body to use either EMs or use percentages. Pixels, it's a bad idea to do pixels because pixels are based on screen sizes, and people have different kinds of screens. I'm sure the screen that you're looking at, pixels, is different than what I'm looking at right now. The number of pixels on your screen is very likely, to be different than mine. So when you start doing by pixels, things can look a lot different from one computer to the next. When you're doing EMs and percentages, it makes things a little more consistent across the board, so to speak. And so for best practices points, usually best to use EMs and percentages as opposed to others. Points are used, PTs, points are used a lot for printing web pages and stuff. And you can actually have a CSS file that is just there's ways to embed a CSS, I don't want to say embed, that's a bad word because we do embed for things, but there's a way to create a separate CSS file just for printing so that it might skip some things. There's all kinds of different customized things you can do. So might not include certain parts of the pages and everything else, and it's set up just for printing. And we'll take a look at that here eventually. And then also there's a keyword relative to a limited range of size. And here's an example: font size extra small. Sizes are relative to the browser's default font size, but size options are limited. So by default, kind of do want to mention, so by default, the browser does have a default file size. And you can actually go, let me go find that real quick. So let's do this again. We'll go up here to the three dots, go down to settings and appearance. we go down to font size, and this is the recommended one. But this is something that, basically they just have different, very small, small, medium, large, very large. So most likely, I'm sure by default, unless you've changed this for some reason, it's going to be the medium setting. So this is kind of how you start out things, okay? So, obviously you can make it smaller or bigger for your own purposes, but this is what it's going to use as a default for, so when you're making fonts bigger, it's going to look, if you start out on your computer and you got very small, and I have very large on my computer, when I adjust things on my font size, it's probably going to look different, right? It's going to be relative to kind of what you started with in the first place, if that makes sense. So, all right. All right. Well, we're going to spend a lot more time on this, okay? So you'll see a lot more of this tomorrow. CSS colors, and we'll go through CSS colors here a little bit. So HTML uses color names or codes to designate color values. 3 types of color codes can be used with CSS. There's hexadecimal values, consist of a 6-digit number code that corresponds to RGB, red, blue, green. And actually, let me pull up some old stuff here. Let's see some HTML. I think I'll just search for, there's so many different ones. I'm sure I can just search for it real quick. So there's a lot of different sites that have them. So here's your hexadecimal colors, okay? These are hexadecimal. Some things you can use the color name for, and some are not available necessarily with the color name. And a lot of times it's really best practices. You probably not a good idea to have some with color name, some with hexadecimals, and so forth. And so probably better to just to be consistent what you're doing. Depends on how many colors you're using in that. If you're just using a couple basic colors of red and blue and dark blue, you can go ahead and use the color names a lot of times. And it's always going to be lowercase, but not every color. And sometimes you want it to be a little different shade and stuff. That's where the color codes come in, okay? And these are hexadecimal color codes. And this is just one site that has this. There's a lot more color code chart. I think that's what we're on right here. So yeah, here's color names. Here's the codes. So you're starting off, really dark black all the way to lighter, getting lighter as you go. And these so sometimes you might find some, I kind of like this color. You can grab this, right? You just grab this and use that, right? Let's see if I click that, see what it does, this site does. But this tells you there's different ways to do things. You can use the color name. If a color name's available, use the color name, all right? You can use the hexadecimal value. You can use the RGB, the HSL, right? And also and some of them have these shorthand stuff. You don't even have to use all 6 digits for a hexadecimal. You can just use 3. Is this a web safe color? This one is not a web safe color, meaning it's going to kind of look different. It could look completely different on one person's computer as another. There's some that are web safe colors, and so if you're wanting to make sure you're consistent and that, you probably want to use what's called a web safe color. This one that I just picked is not, right? Okay, but that is the hexadecimal, and we also see the RG blue, red, green, blue, and then there's also HSL, where you can actually have it partially transparent and that, and so there's different things you can do, and we'll look at that later. So here's a chart where you got black. Here's the hexadecimal value of a black, all zeros. Here's the RGB, and here's the HSL. Obviously, it's all zeros, but it does change as you go on here. So white, all Fs, are going to be 255 for each. So that's actually your range from 0 to 255, black and white. So these are completely polar opposites, so to speak. So, 0, 0, 0 is black, 255 is white. Every other number you're going to see in between 0 or 255, right? And so for green, this is how you do a green. 0, 128, 0. It's red, green, red, blue, green, right? So, and you don't have to memorize these. You just look it up, right? HTML elements are positioned on a web page as a block or an inline content. Yeah. So a block element appears as a block because it starts and ends with a new line. So some of the elements are block elements. Some of your HTML elements are block elements, and some of them are inline elements. A block element appears as a block because it starts and ends with a new line. So, like if you have a tag and you have some text, and then you copy that and you do the same thing. You put it right next to each other, even in the file. It doesn't matter. It's going to be a new. Some are going to always create a new line with that content. It's going to go to the next line. Go to the next line. There's other ones that are going to be inline and you could actually have multiple on the same line. Okay. So inline elements are displayed without line breaks, so they flow within the same line. So I also want to go over the CSS box model a little bit here. It's an important thing. So everything in a browser is basically a box. Everything in your HTML, even if the thing you have is a circle, and the shape, you create some kind of a circle. There's ways to do that. And actually, I'm going to show you some from a couple semesters ago. I've got some examples where it's a circle, and you say, well, is this a circle or is this a square? Well, actually, even though you're viewing it as a circle, on that page behind the scenes, it's actually a square. You're just seeing the parts that's a circle. Okay, so everything's a box in HTML on a web page. Let me go look here. Let's go look at something. So here's our box model. I don't know. This don't always work like I want it to. Let me see. So here you've got a margin of 30. So this is and you might come in here, and it all depends on this is. You see me click inspect. This is going right into developer tools, and it all depends on how you have things laid out. And basically, once you go somewhere and you come back again, it's going to be different. I don't even know, to be honest with you, I don't remember what the default is, but that probably what I click there should go to this. Sometimes there's other ways to get into developer tools. Okay, that don't always go where you think it's going to go, okay? And you'll learn this as time goes on here. But so what I did here on that one was, here I'm just going to close this again. I went and right-clicked on this and did inspect, and it goes right to, so this is your box model. So this box has a margin of 30, okay? It has this border, okay? 4.480. It has a padding of 20. And here's your content. Okay. So this is called the box model, right? And always remember, first you have the most outside portion is going to be margin, then your border, then your padding, then your content. Okay. And we'll spend more time on this. So don't worry if that's confusing. CSS box model describes content boxes on a web page. Each context box can have margins, borders, and padding. Margin provides a passive white space between block elements. Okay. So if you've got two next to each other, the margin's going to be that outer part that's going to kind of butt up against each other. Okay. When I say butt up against each other, it's going to be right next to your other element on that page. Okay. Border separates the padding and the margin of the block element. Padding is a pass of white space between the content and the border of a block element. So always remember the padding is closer to that content. Margin's always at the very, the external, kind of at the very end of the outside of that box. So yeah, they don't really go. We're going to go into that box model. We're going to go into some areas a lot more. They just touch on some things. We're going to go into some things a lot more. Okay. Um, Not today, but tomorrow we're going to go into a little bit more in-depth stuff for the box model, so you can really understand that box model and understand that everything is kind of a box on a page. We're going to go into colors a lot more tomorrow, and we're going to go into selectors tomorrow, and especially special kind of selectors. There's child selectors and that. And so I'm going to have some really good demonstrations for us to go through all of that. So that's all I have for today. And tomorrow we'll go ahead and kind of review a few things. Um, I think I went through some things kind of quick, and maybe I'm sure a little bit. Some of you are probably a little bit confused about some things, and don't worry, we'll kind of go back through some of the basics again tomorrow, and we'll build on that as well. So, and I have some really good demonstrations for some things tomorrow. So I will let you go for the day and take care.